Great. Welcome, everybody, to the 2026 Amphibian Migration and Road Crossing Volunteer Virtual Training. I really appreciate, as we all do, your attendance, and I'm really excited to be here with my awesome teammates here, Penny Adler-Colvin and Emma Clements. I'm Laura Heedy, and we're all with the Hudson River Estuary Program at the DEC, and Penny and I are here with our collaboration with Cornell University and Emma through NUIPIC. So just a heads up, if you're having audio problems, you probably can't hear me, but hopefully you can read the slide. But if you have problems during the webinar at all, sometimes the phone, or always the phone, is a more reliable audio source. So you can always click on the audio and video tab at the top and choose to have use your phone instead of the speakers on your computer. And you can even make it really easy and have it call you, have WebEx call you. And then just a heads up that if you have any technical difficulties, Emma, Penny, and I will be monitoring the chat box for that purpose. We can read your chats. Everybody else, it's not visible to anybody else. But what will be visible is the Q&A box, which is where we would like you to share your questions during the training, which we will do our best to get to at the end of the program. And we'll also try to follow up with question and answer that we don't get to tonight in a follow-up email. And if so, again, there's a difference between the chat. Just use the chat if you're having some technical difficulties, but send questions through the Q&A. It's a lot easier for us to monitor that during the webinar. If you are not seeing an option to use a Q&A box, there's 3 dots in the lower right corner of the display. And if you click on those, you should have the option to open up the Q&A box. Okay. So the first part of this evening's program, we're going to go over a little bit of introductory information and some training basics, which I'll give the intro, and then I'll hand it over to Penny to talk about volunteer training basics. And just a word from our sponsor. So this project, the AM&RC Project, is part of it was under the Hudson River Estuary Program. And the Estuary Program is one of DEC's watershed programs within the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And we're unique in that we're not regulatory. We actually work across 3 different DEC regions because we take an ecosystem-based approach. And the program has staff working on a number of teams addressing different goals. We're focused in this work in the Conserved Natural Areas goal of the estuary program. All of this work is outlined in our 5-year action agenda, which is on the website if you're interested. But the area where we work is displayed in green on the map that you see on the right. And that green area represents the watershed or the drainage, all the land that is connected to the tidal portion of the Hudson River. And 2 important habitats in that area are forests and wetlands. And that's something we'll be talking about tonight. The work that our conservation and land use team does primarily, in addition to this project, is providing technical assistance and outreach about biodiversity to help local municipalities and land trusts and others work on conservation planning. And so that work, if you want to learn more about that, is on our Cornell website, Conservation Planning in the Hudson River Estuary Watershed. And we encourage you to check out that website if you're interested in learning more about how municipalities and others can be trying to advance biodiversity conservation locally and regionally. So as I mentioned, the Amphibian Migrations and Road Crossings Project focuses on these 2 key habitats, forests and woodland pools. And while there's many amphibians that live in the region using all different kinds of habitats, we're really focused on this particular group. And because they migrate to vernal pools or woodland pools for breeding, and then they go back to the forest, they're especially vulnerable when those migration routes cross roads. And so that is the that is the call for the volunteer role here, is reducing that mortality on roads. We're going to talk more about that, but I just wanted to do some kind of Basic 101 information before we get any further. And first, just talking a little bit about amphibians. So why or how are amphibians different from all the other taxonomic groups, like reptiles, say, and mammals? So one attribute is that they rely on external heat sources to control their body temperature. They also need to remain in moist environments. So I think a lot of people, when they hear about amphibians, they assume that they're in water, but really they just need to be in a moist environment because of this permeable skin that exchanges oxygen. You can say they breathe through their skin. The amphibians we're talking about tonight live in the forest, so they actually are only aquatic during their breeding season. And so when they, where they live in the forest to stay moist is in that thick leaf litter and under fallen logs and rocks on the forest floor. And so that's why it's so important to have all of that natural debris on the forest floor, because that creates the moist conditions they need. But what is special about amphibians is that most species rely on both land and water. And so they live on land, they return to water to breed, and that's where the juveniles develop. And then they, eventually become terrestrial themselves. And also because most of them have a fragile egg that requires an aquatic environment to develop. And so this idea of living in both kinds of environments, that is reflected in the name amphibian, ampha referring to that they live in these two kinds of environments, both terrestrial and aquatic, and bios referring to life. So they live and they need both of these kinds of habitats. And that's why they're really important when we think about habitat connectivity. They're like the ambassadors for showing how important it is to have wetland and upland habitats that are well connected, that they can move from one to the other safely. One other note on amphibians is that in New York State, we have 18 species of salamanders, 11 species of frogs, and 3 species of toads. So of those 32 species, about 28 of those occur right here in the Hudson River Estuary watershed. And I share that just as a reminder, again, our source of pride. The Hudson Valley is the most biodiverse part of New York State, but also because, it's a stewardship responsibility to make sure we conserve habitats and conserve these species. And that's, again, part of the reason why this project exists. So what are the goals of AM&RC? Since the beginning of this project back in 2009, the goals have always remained the same. One is it's a great opportunity to raise awareness about these different habitat types, about biodiversity in the Hudson Valley, but also the impact of land use change on habitat connectivity. And we do that through, many ways, but even you all coming to this training and then maybe leaving the training and telling friends and family about it is one great way to help raise awareness. We also, in the Hudson Valley, there's more than 5,000 miles of roads. We could never know where all the migrations are crossing roads. So volunteers help us to find where are there places where there's risk of mortality for migrating amphibians. They can help reduce that mortality by helping move them across the road. And then the project, through the data that are collected, can help us identify conservation opportunities. Hopefully, we're connecting people to nature and giving a really rewarding volunteer experience. And then kind of a social science experiment that we still need to investigate. But I like to think that by being involved in a project like this, by seeing firsthand what the implications are of habitat fragmentation and understanding how vulnerable a beautiful Jefferson blue-spotted salamander is when crossing the road, will help compel volunteers to then maybe become involved in their local communities, maybe on the planning board or on the conservation advisory committee, or maybe get involved volunteering at a local land trust, or even becoming stewards of their property in a new and better way for nature. And then ultimately too, we want to create a foundation for asking more questions amongst our research colleagues and potential collaborators that could potentially use our data. So before I move on, I wanted to pause because hopefully I can't do a show of hands, but hopefully many of you did the homework and listened to the YouTube modules. And so we wanted to take a minute and see, you should be able to write to us in the chat. And I'm going to open up the chat, and I would love it if you could add a word or two of what you learned about what makes a vernal pool special and different from other kinds of wetlands. And isolated, correct. Somebody added isolated. What else? Hopefully you're finding the chat and you can make a note in the chat. Dry up in summer, right? Ephemeral, seasonal, fish free, exactly, because they dry up and they don't have a steady source of water. They're often have no fish. Yeah, they are an important part of the forest ecosystem and are connected to the forest floor. They sit in a depression on the forest floor. Great. Any other thoughts? I'm going to just expand this so I can see even better all of your comments. They're yep, temporary, not protected. Yeah, that's right. Most of them are not protected. Water is not always present. Great. That's right. Ooh, woodland pools are one type of vernal pool that's in the forest. That's right. We use them kind of synonymously, but it's really, it's a good detail to catch there. And they're critical for amphibian breeding. Well done. I appreciate everybody's doing the homework and contributing to this exercise. Yeah, so they're small and shallow. They do vary in size. They sit in an isolated basin. They dry up typically in summer, and because there's not a steady source of water, and because they dry up, they are fishless, and that is why they are, such good and critical habitat for breeding amphibians. Thanks, everybody. Okay. And this was all right, covered in YouTube training part 1. So when do vernal pool breeding amphibians migrate? Well, it's going to be coming soon. Right now, the wood frogs are probably in their frozen state. The salamanders are hunkered underground in burrows and probably below the frost line, although all the snow is, very insulating. So it's a lot probably warmer than we think underground right now. But the migration is going to happen after we start having warming temperatures and some of the ice on vernal pools starts to melt a little bit and the snowpack starts to go away. But generally, there are 3 key features that make it suitable for migration. And so after we get like a warming phase, when we start having nighttime temperatures that stay above 40 degrees after sunset, and it's raining, that's usually not until late winter, early spring. I'm really excited because we're having a true winter this year. I know I'm in a minority, but I love all the snow we're having. And I think that might set us up for like some actual bigger nights of migration as opposed to medium nights. And so the third part of it is that the ground is thawed. So when the ground is thawed, evening temperatures stay above 40 degrees and it's raining. Those are that's the trifecta of what we really want to see happen. And then in the Hudson Valley, there's variability from when that might occur, depending on where you are in the Hudson Valley, both geographically, if you're in the southern end of the Hudson Valley versus the northern end, and depending on the elevation you are at. So, but typically it's March or April. And this is generally kind of what it looks like, although this is not, drawn to scale, but you'll just get lots and lots of amphibians all moving at the same time when these conditions all happen, on a particular night, or like I said, it could be a few nights. It's not always a big night of migration, but generally it triggers a lot of movement at the same time because it's good for them all to arrive at the pool at the same time for courtship and for mating. And that's what it's called an explosive migration, because it happens with so many individuals all moving at once. And this is in the YouTube training part 2. If you haven't watched it yet, you can learn more about this in that YouTube module. So I'm going to hand it over now to Penny to go over how and what volunteers need to do. And just to point out again that you can follow along in the handbook, or just remember you can always look back at the handbook if you would like to refresh your learning on any of these topics. So take it away, Penny. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura. Everybody can see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Great. So just as a reminder, we are referring to the volunteer handbook that is available on our webpage if you'd like to follow along. But as Laura said in the beginning, it is not necessary. So let's talk a little bit about what amphibian migrations and road crossings volunteers do. So One of the things that you guys will do as volunteers when you hopefully join us is to find and document road crossing locations in the Hudson Valley. Because we don't have a database of known crossings covering the entire watershed, but through the network of volunteers that we have, we're starting to build a better understanding of those locations. Of course, there's so many roads in the Hudson Valley that the more that volunteers can get out and find these crossings, the better. Volunteers also help to reduce mortality or death at road crossing sites by carefully moving amphibians across safely. Volunteers record information about weather, traffic, species, counts of live and dead amphibians, and submit your observations to the Hudson River Estuary Program. And probably most importantly of all, as a volunteer of this project, you will take all necessary precautions to keep yourselves safe, and we will talk more about how to do so. Responsibilities of volunteers. They include signing up for the AM&RC Project emails. So you can do that by going to our webpage, and there is a banner at the bottom where you can register. And we also want you to check your email for updates during migration season. Number 2, attend a training or watch online volunteer training modules. So you're all doing great on that part. Here, we're just showing you what the training modules look like on YouTube. As Laura said earlier, hopefully you did your homework and watched the ones that we asked you to, but they are posted there so you can watch them whenever and return to them if you would like a refresher on any of these topics. Also, read the volunteer handbook, again, available on our webpage. The handbook is short, yet it is very comprehensive. It's available online, covers everything from why the migration happens to what our conservation concerns are, how to participate, what to bring, how to be safe, how to find new amphibian crossings, how to report, and more. So, third responsibility of volunteers is to learn to identify the amphibian species that may be encountered during the migration. There's about 8 key species that you're going to want to know very well. There are a lot of resources available for you on our AM&RC website and through the training videos, along with other resources as well that we will share with you. And that will help you learn the identifications. And we have on our webpage as well an amphibian identification guide shown here in the right, and you can download that as a PDF and use it during migration nights. If you're able to, we recommend laminating it so it's waterproof because, as Laura said, the conditions for migrations are wet. Covered in YouTube training part 5. Some additional resources to help with understanding vernal pools and amphibians include the 3 listed here we really like, but of course, if you have one that you like to use, please go ahead and do that. And feel free to share it with us so we can share it with other volunteers too. Number 4 for responsibilities of volunteers, get prepared to be safe while walking along the road on dark, rainy nights. Your safety comes first. We really can't emphasize this enough. The most important step in preparing for the migration is making sure that you are safe and that you are visible. Please make sure to take all the necessary precautions, including wearing a reflective safety vest and bright lights. You need to be seen by cars. Migrations occur on dark, rainy nights, and most drivers don't really expect to see people out on the road then. You also want to prepare for cold and rainy weather. When talking about conditions previously, we referred to them as warm rainy nights, but it's not really warm to us because the temperature is only around 40 degrees Fahrenheit or so. Along with the rain, it can be quite chilly if you're out there for a while. We recommend wearing rain pants and a rain jacket. And I like to wear a hat with a brim to protect my glasses from the rain. Number 3, bring a friend. It is very helpful. They can keep an eye out for traffic, assist with data collection, and you could even take turns with different roles. And especially if you're trying to find a new crossing, it's really helpful to have somebody driving and somebody else looking for amphibians or signs of amphibians. Stay alert. It's really easy to get consumed by helping the amphibians on the road, but super important to stay mindful that you are on a road where cars could be coming by. Another important note to keep yourself safe is please do not interfere with traffic or flag down drivers. This is not your role as a volunteer in this project. If cars come by, just step aside. We understand it can be hard to do so if you have a lot of amphibians and want to prevent them getting hit by the cars. But if you find you have a crossing with a lot of activity and a lot of mortality, be sure to document that. And you could even possibly take steps with your municipality to look into something like a temporary road closure or putting up a blinking sign to help avoid some of that mortality. But that is not something we are asking you to do as a volunteer in this project. Finally, we find that it's not uncommon to have people stop to make sure that you are okay when out serving during the migration, especially if you have your hazards on your car. So we suggest bringing some of the project fact sheets, the top right image right there, available on our website. So you can hand them out if somebody is curious about what you're doing. It's happened to me before, and people really appreciate it when you have the information ready to share. It also helps to educate other people. There's also the bottom right image, which you can place within your car windshield. So if people come to investigate why you're parked there on a rainy night, they have the information. A little bit of a checklist for what you might need for a migration. They include a reflective vest, rain gear, a bright flashlight, a headlamp, warm layers, extra batteries, clipboard or notebook, data forms, something to write with, AM&RC fact sheets and an identification guide, and a friend. We also have listed here some optional things that you can bring, like an umbrella or a blinking light. Some of us even like to bring a spatula for moving the dead amphibians across the road. Additionally, in recent years, we have been asking volunteers to submit one photo of each species that they observe. It's not necessary to take a photo of every single individual that you see. So for example, say you observe 12 spring peepers, 25 wood frogs, and 15 spotted salamanders. We ask for one photo of a spring peeper, one photo of a wood frog, and one photo of a spotted salamander. This is to confirm that you are indeed accurately identifying the species. We will, of course, take any photos that you'd like to share, especially high quality ones. Also want to emphasize that you can take pictures of people who are participating in the surveying and the migration, but we will only use those photos if they are wearing the proper safety gear. If you're considering bringing children on a migration, it's really important to take an honest look at whether or not it's a good idea. We have some questions to ask yourself / considerations, including, are they good at following directions? Do they know how to be safe around traffic? Will they be gentle with the amphibians? Is the road site family friendly? Will you have at least one adult for every child? If you answered no to any of these questions, we recommend that you wait until they're older. Another responsibility of AM&RC volunteers includes watching the weather, checking your email, and getting ready. We have lots of options for keeping up to date on the weather conditions. We have weather.gov linked right here. And when it comes time to actually go out on a migration night, use care when moving the amphibians. So how do we actually assist the amphibians? And this is on page 4 of the volunteer handbook if you are following along. First, you're going to park in a safe place away from an amphibian crossing, making sure to be respectful of private property. You keep an eye underfoot. You scan the road with your lantern or your flashlight. You're going to keep your feet on the street unless it's unsafe. Again, your safety is of the utmost importance. You're going to make sure that your hands or your bucket, anything that you're using to interact with the amphibians, are clean and damp. We ask you to move live amphibians in the direction that they are moving well off the road, and remove any dead amphibians from the road. This is to make sure that you don't double count them. When you are actually moving the amphibians, we ask that you maintain a gentle but firm hold and handle the amphibians as little as possible. Another responsibility, a very important one, of AM&RC volunteers includes recording your data and submitting your observations. And the section on collecting data is on page 7 in the volunteer handbook. So what we like to recommend is recording data on printed forms, but as the project has been going on for a number of years, we've heard of innovative ways to get the data. So some people will even record it on their phone. So that's what we recommend, but of course, do what works for you. If you are going to different locations, use a different data form for each location, and then that will also translate to submitting a different survey for each location. Take photos of each species you observe, and especially any that you can't identify. Emma will talk a little bit more about this, but we would much rather you have a submission of an unknown amphibian with a photo than to try and guess. We're more than happy to help you identify the amphibian. You can continue documenting and assisting amphibians for as long as you'd like. And please remember to record the time and temperature when your survey ended, the traffic, and the distance of the road that you surveyed. When you're driving away from the site, please use caution when you're there and on your way home. Another important note is we ask you to please submit your data even if you didn't see any amphibians. Having data that there were no amphibians is still valuable data. So we have a paper data form available on our website that you can download and print out for collecting in real time. There's also a copy of this on page 8 and 9 on the volunteer handbook. And we ask that you enter your data into Survey 123. And either when you get home or the next morning, we will have links available for this on the AM&RC Project webpage. And Emma's going to talk a little bit more about using the Survey 123 online data form. So I'll hand it over to Emma.
Yeah, thanks, Penny. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so hopefully folks are seeing the online data form.
We can see it.
Okay, cool. Penny, thanks. Just going to turn off my video just to reduce any chance that there might be an internet issue. So I will turn off my, if I can, which, why am I struggling with this? Hold on real quick, everyone. Sorry about that. Okay, we're going to share the screen again. Okay, awesome. All right. Yeah, hey, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm going to be talking to you about submitting data into our data form. So you will come home after your night out, and we are hoping that you'll submit the data that night or the next day, just basically as soon as possible, so we can get live updates out there to folks. So yeah, it's really important that our volunteers know how to correctly enter data online to reduce the amount of follow-up that we need to do, but also to keep our data as accurate as possible. So this is the online data form. So yeah, as Penny mentioned, you'll have the paper data form handy to record observations, which you can either print or have it up on your phone. You can use scrap paper to record observations too, whatever works well for you, and making sure that you have got all the information down that you need to. Yeah, and then you're going to come home and record information into this online data form. We do have instructions on in a PDF format on our AM&RC webpage, and I'll actually show you where that's located. So this is our webpage here, and if you scroll down, you'll see that there's some volunteer materials down here. A lot of the information that we're talking about tonight, of course, is on this webpage. Penny talked a lot about them, but yeah, so here you'll click on the resources for Migration Night, and then right here is the online data form instructions. So if you need them, they're right here. And we will also have this recording up afterwards if you need to revisit anything. Let's switch back to this. And yeah, lastly, we recommend using a desktop or laptop and a browser such as Chrome or Microsoft Edge to enter your data. If you don't have a computer of some sort, you can use your phone, but yeah, we recommend using desktop, laptop. All right, so let's get into it. So you're just going to go down the bottom, click next. That'll take you to a new page. The first couple pages are pretty self-explanatory. The first one is date and time information. And, you know, I will note, you'll see that I have a lot of pre-filled information just to keep things moving along. But this is the date and time section. So we will actually have we have a feature here that disables folks from putting in a future date and a time that is during the day. So I'll show you what that looks like. It's going to yell at you. It's going to say, please check the date and time. Surveys can't be in the future or have a negative survey duration. So I'll move that back, and you'll see that you have your estimated survey duration down the bottom here. So I was out for two hours, and I think that was, last night. So clicking next into the temperature information. Once again, pretty self-explanatory. I did want to draw your attention to the emojis that will pop up if you do put up or put in a temperature that might be outside of those normal ranges. So let's say you accidentally put in like, oops, my keyboard there, 500 instead of 50. So it says those temperatures seem a bit extreme. Please double check your entry. So whoops, I'm going to get rid of that 0. And then it says I'm all set. You can also add some comments if you would like to about your temperature data. I'm going to go into the next page now, which is weather conditions and traffic information. Once again, pretty self-explanatory. You know, a big part of this online data form too, we have these really handy little notes underneath every question that we ask. So please read through all of the hints and the notes in this, especially if it's your first time. It'll become easier as you go along, I promise. And don't hesitate to reach out to us at any point if you're having issues with the data form or you have questions about submitting data. Yeah, so we're going to ask you about precipitation conditions during your survey. Did you observe any additional weather conditions such as fog, light breeze, or wind during your survey? Weather conditions in the past 24 hours, and traffic conditions during your survey. The next section is crossing location information. So you're going to put in your county. We only list the counties we focus on here, as you can see. But if you're submitting data from outside one of our focus area counties, you can choose the other option, and it's down here. And then town, village, and city. So once you hit county, only the municipalities in that county will be listed here. If you are unsure, you can leave this blank. We realized that it can be sometimes hard to know which municipality you are located in geographically without, you know, an application such as GIS or something. So, you know, if you're unsure, you can leave it. Road name, the nearest crossroad. Have you surveyed this road before? And then the approximate length of the road stretch you surveyed in miles. So we do have a little conversion here, a little note about the conversion. We sometimes get a lot of lengths in feet, which we will have to follow up with you. So if you put, you know, 5,000 in there, we're gonna, you know, we'll follow up with you. Yeah, definitely remember to put that in as miles. And then you can add any additional comments on the crossing location. You'll find that that is repeated throughout our data form. We have places to put comments if needed. So let's move on to one of the most important pages, the map page. So I will not get into, you know, I'm not going to read all the instructions. So please read them before dropping your pin location on the map when you are doing this for the first time. So we're gonna ask you to put the approximate midpoint of the road you surveyed on a map. So you're gonna scroll down here. You're gonna see this little map feature pop up. And it won't look as zoomed in as this. It'll probably look a little bit more like that. So I'll hover over these buttons real quick. So this is the zoom in function, the zoom out, you just saw that. We have this function, which is the default map view. So if you wanted to bring yourself back to the original map view that pops up when you scroll down, the first map view that you see, you can click that. This one is the Find My Location. So if you have location enabled on your laptop or on your device, it'll go to where you currently are. We do not have that on our state laptop, so I will not do that. This button is also important. You can enlarge the map, so I will do so because it's a lot easier for me to see. And in order to drop a pin, oh, well, you can go up here too. If you wanted to change the map the way it looks, feel free to play around with it if you want to. And you can actually, this is the delete button. So let's say you just feel like, you know, maybe you zoomed in and all of a sudden it went a bit wily and you click down and the point is there, but you're like, okay, hold on, this is all wrong. I want to restart. You can just click that button. It'll get rid of that pin and you can just restart. So basically, in order to drop a pin, first of all, you can go up to this little address bar here, which probably most of you will use. You can put in the municipality. You can also put in the specific address or if you know an address of the road stretch, you can put that in there. But I will tell you that when you do put a specific address in, so I'm just going to put the municipality in first. So I'm going to click enter. And you'll see that it just, you know, it's just giving you the whole entire polygon or the whole entire area of New Paltz here. You really need to zoom in. So yeah, let me see here. I see Grove Street. Let me put in Grove Street. Here we go, Grove Street. All right, so you'll see here that it does put a point on that street. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to zoom in as close as I can. You know, let's say you have 12 Grove Street and you put that in there. Unfortunately, the pin is going to go onto that building, right? We don't want that. We need the pinpoint to be in the road stretch. It is very important. So what you're gonna do is you're basically just going to use the left mouse button, and that's how you move this pin. That's how you make sure the pin is where you need it to be. You're gonna zoom in real close because we get a lot of points that are, you know, someone might be all the way out here and they're like, cool, that's where I surveyed, but then you zoom in and it's off the road. So we're gonna ask you to zoom in and we're gonna ask you to make sure you feel good about where that point is. And, you know, you can feel free, you know, when it's your first time too, I like to let folks know it's okay to kind of play around with it a little bit just to get a good feel for it. You know, you hold down on the left mouse button. That's how you drag the map around without moving this pin. In order to move the pin, you click that left mouse. You just click it. You don't hold it down. So I feel good about where my point, my pinpoint is for my midpoint of my road crossing. And I am just going to click the X button. This won't get rid of your point location at all. It just takes you back to that main screen. And it also puts your lat long in there. So some folks actually, you know, you can screenshot. Sometimes I like to do this on a night out. I have Google Maps open and I will actually take a screenshot before I start, you know, along my road. And then I'll take a screenshot at the end. And then I can go back and I can look on Google Maps or Bing Maps. And then I can make sure that it's the correct distance. And then I can find the midpoint easier. And, you know, that also, you can find the lat long and you could just put it in there as well if you would like to go that direction. And it is optional, but also encouraged if you want to also select your start and end points. So I can just show you real quick what happens there. So right away, the midpoint, it'll show you, it defaults to the midpoint of your survey, which is great. very easy. So then all you have to do is do the same setup here where you're going to enlarge the map. You're going to zoom in using either your wheel on your mouse. The wheel on my mouse is a little fidgety. So I'll use this. And then once again, I'm just going to left click on my mouse to drop that pin for my starting point of my survey. And then I'm going to go down here. And then you'll see the starting point automatically shows up here. I'm going to enlarge the map. I'm going to hold down the left mouse button. And let's say this is where I ended my survey. And I'm just going to click on the left mouse button. And yeah, that looks great. And I'm going to exit. So that is the map portion. And you know, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, it's okay. It gets easier, I promise you. If you have any issues, like I said, please feel free to reach out. And yeah, let's head on to the next section, which is contact information. So it's going to say, this is going to pop up first, and it will say, is this your first time submitting data for the 2026 migration season? If it is not, obviously put no. But if it is, put yes. And if it isn't your first time, you know, it'll ask you a lot less information the next time you submit a data form. So you don't have to put all this information in every time. So don't worry about that. So we're going to ask you, you know, basic information, first name, last name. Don't worry about the volunteer ID yet. It's coming. Your phone number, email. Make sure your email is correct. It can be easy to put in a random number or a letter. So definitely double check that, because this is our main way of contacting you. You know, as well as your phone number, make sure that's correct. But we do email a lot, and obviously when we ask for photos, it's really important, or any, you know, confirmation or anything. So yeah, make sure it's correct, double check, triple check that. And then your street address, your town, city, state, zip code, all of that good information. And then the total number of volunteers in your group, including yourself. So this is important because we want to keep accurate counts of volunteers in our database. So if you just give us, you know, Ambi instead of ambistoma, so if we just, you know, we might have 10 Ambis in our volunteer database. So, you know, we want to make sure that they're unique, they're counted uniquely, and that we count every volunteer. And then if they're comfortable with it, if you have their, you know, email or contact information, please put it down. And next, have you attended an in-person or virtual AM&RC training or watched the 5 training modules? So you can all put yes down. You have attended the virtual WebEx training. Are you volunteering with an AM&RC partner? So we have a list of fantastic partners, and you will be able to choose from this list if you are. Next is, yeah, this is also one of the, you know, biggest sections on our data form. One of the most important ones is if you saw amphibians, live or dead. So if you saw only dead amphibians, submit your data. If you saw no amphibians, as Penny mentioned, submit your data. No data is still good data. So I'm going to say I did see amphibians on my night out. So this is what you will come to. So the first section will be the salamander data entry, and then you'll move on to the frogs and toads. You'll most likely only need to click on the first header here, the commonly encountered salamanders. You know, the most commonly encountered during a migration night. And if you need a refresher on what the species look like, you can always use our amphibian identification guide. And there are links underneath each species as well that takes you to a page where you can see photos and descriptions. And, you know, I have the amphibian ID guide up right now, which is also found on our Amphibian Migrations and Road Crossings webpage, which you can have open as you're going through the data form. But I believe it is actually on this page. Yes, so there is a link here on this page if you do need that. So let's say I saw 20 live spotted, and that is the, oh, and 5 four toads. So what's going to happen now is that if I click next, and yeah, if you have any comments about your salamander observations, you can write them in here. So because I saw a four-toed, it's going to ask me, because this is a species that is commonly confused with the redback salamander. So in order to make sure that you did see a four-toed salamander, we're going to ask you to submit a photo. But as Penny mentioned earlier, we need a photo of every amphibian species that you see, not every individual, just every amphibian species that you see. So let's say you saw 20 spotted salamanders on a night out. We're not asking you to send us a photo of every single one of those spotted salamanders or 20 photos. We're asking you to submit one photo of a spotted salamander, so then we know that you know how to correctly identify that amphibian species. So basically what I've done here is I've already put in a photo, and you'll see it actually takes my information from previous pages. Here's an additional identification information slide, which is great just to really kind of make sure that you saw, or you think you saw, the four-toed. I feel good about that. I feel good that I saw a four-toed. And I'm going to click the next page. We'll follow up with you if you think you saw something and you submit it and it's not what you saw. We will definitely follow up with you, and we'll let you know what to look for next time. As Penny mentioned too, when in doubt, you can always put unknown. And we will help you identify it. We would rather you put in unknown than put in something that you didn't actually see and it's inaccurate. Always, you can submit photos to us. You can ask questions, of course. All right, yeah, this is a frogs and toads data entry page. Once again, you probably only need to click on this, the commonly encountered frogs and toads on a migration night. So I put in that I saw 20 live wood frogs, but I also saw 5 unknown frogs this night. And I'm just going to click into the next section here. And what's going to happen if you put any unknown or other frogs and toads, you'll have this page that asks you to write, to give us some comments, give us some notes, some descriptions, and some photos. So I wrote in here, I didn't feel confident in my identification of these 5 frogs. They look like peepers, but I wasn't just 100% sure. But I submitted 1 photo below, but I have more if you need them. Give us some information there, and we'll definitely be able to help you with any unknown or confusing identifications. And then you can upload a photo. You can upload as many as 5 for this section. And you can always email us in our Woodland Pool inbox as well if you need to send more photos. I'm going to go to the next section now because I feel good about that. All right, so now we're kind of at the end. We're at the end of the survey. We're kind of at the summary pages, but before we get to that last recap page, we're going to ask that you enter the approximate number of live amphibians that you helped across the road. If you helped all of the amphibians, the live amphibians across the road, you can put them all in there. Let's say this night, 10 of them were on their way. They did not need my help. They weren't in any danger. I let them go, but I helped 40 across the road. I'm going to put that in there. And if you're able, you can indicate the general compass direction the amphibians were moving. I use the compass on my cell phone. If you have a compass, you can obviously use that as well. Don't worry if you didn't get this information. It is not required, but if you have it, of course, add it in. And then, yeah, this is another photo section. We're happy to receive any other interesting photos, amphibians or not. We've had some really cool photos of like owls, crawfish, which has been interesting. I think some birds have dropped them on their way through, or another animal of some sort, which has been funny to get those in. Yeah, we get all sorts of photos and we love seeing them. And then, yeah, of course, photos of volunteers wearing appropriate attire. you know, of course, so wearing your safety vests. And if you submit photos, you are consenting to us using them in future presentations and publications. We will give credit, of course. So just know that. And if you have more than 5 photos, you can email us, as I mentioned. And this is the end of the survey. So this is a recap of your data entry. So make sure to review this page carefully, and if something looks incorrect, you can always click the back button to navigate to the page where you need to correct something. So I'll show you right now. You can just click back. All your information will be there. It's okay. Nothing will change. But yeah, make sure that you really go through this. Take a really good look. Double check and triple check and then when you feel like you're all good to go, finally click the next button and make sure you click submit. That is the most important right there. And I think that is the end of my data form section. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to hand it over to Laura, I believe, for some confusing ID.
Thank you, Emma.
Yeah.
That was great. And we're going to be kind of revisiting all the many reasons why it's important to do what Emma is advising to make sure the data entry is accurate. So let me share my screen now. Let's see, there we go. Yeah, and I also want to just say thanks to everybody for those of you who had a hard time logging in, which I see there's been quite a number of you. I thank you for your patience. I'm not sure what went wrong, but if you made it in, thank you. And if you didn't and you're watching this as a recording, I'm sorry that there was a problem with the technical side of things with WebEx. Okay, so I'm going to jump into some of the commonly confused species that people ask about, as well as some of the other kinds of questions we get. And we've been trying to keep up with the questions in the Q&A box as well. So thank you for sending those along. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you watched the module 5 of the YouTube training series that went over amphibian identification, because we won't do a full overview of that tonight, but you can always go back and look at that, as well as our identification guide that Penny mentioned. But I wanted to just point out a few species that would be helpful for you to make sure you understand the differences of and learn their key characteristics. So the first, well, 3 species are all salamanders. So we're going to talk about the Jefferson blue-spotted salamander complex and how that compares to the leadback phase of the northern redback salamander. And then also look at the northern redback salamander in its more traditional morph and how that compares to the four-toed salamander. One thing I'm going to say, if you're new to amphibian identification, this is not like trying to learn warblers in all their various phases and the hundreds that might, come through in migration. This, there's really, maybe 10 species that you might see commonly, maybe even fewer. And it's pretty easy to make the distinctions between the different species once you learn a few key characteristics. So that's what this next section is all about. So let's start first with the Jefferson blue-spotted salamander complex. And the complex refers to, it's a group of species, primarily the Jefferson salamander and the blue-spotted salamander, that historically started hybridizing, creating all females. And there's other species actually that are part of this complex. So unless there's genetic testing done, most people refer to them together as the complex. And so, and the reason being too, is you're going to see physical characteristics of both species. So we don't expect you to know the difference. We just want you to know how to identify what we're calling the complex, as opposed to, say, a spotted salamander, or in this case, a redback salamander. So first, let's talk about the Jefferson blue-spotted salamander. They're large and often characterized as robust. They have a broad head, they're not as big as a spotted salamander, but they are chunky in the way a spotted salamander would be. They can be, up to maybe about 7.5 inches long. And they have what is described as exceedingly long toes. They are very good diggers. While most of these ambystoma salamanders live, underground in the burrows of small animals, which is partly why the group is called the mole salamanders. They also dig, and the Jefferson blue spotted salamander in particular has even been observed like digging through snow to get on their way for migration. So the long toes, it's a good thing to remember, the broad head. Now let's compare this to the much more petite lead-back phase of the redback salamander. I'm guessing all of you, if I was to ask for a show of hands, if I could see you, everybody would raise their hands. They've seen a redback salamander. It is the most common salamander, it is the most abundant salamander in the Northeast forests. Fully terrestrial, doesn't use vernal pools, doesn't need water, it lays its eggs in upland habitat, but they're often, out taking advantage of these rainy conditions to move. And so they are seen during migrations, as you can tell from these photos. The difference, okay, so we have the Jefferson blue spotted salamander on the left, big bodied, broad head, the very petite lead phase of the redback salamander on the right. You can see the coloring is similar, but the body is much tinier, and it might only reach 4 inches, which is, almost half the length. And they're just very petite. So it's a very different body structure. So, so don't let just color be your guide in identifying. Think about these other features. And I will just add to what Emma and probably Penny said as well, in terms of photos. When you're unsure of an amphibian, it really helps if you're going to take photos to send to us to help us identify it, if you get different angles and if you can get clear photos. So what I would suggest, because taking photos in the dark and the rain while you're cold and your fingers might be cold can be difficult, and we get a lot of fuzzy photos that we cannot help you identify. So practice maybe before you go out on the rainy night, go out in the dark and, maybe practice trying to get things focused. Anyway, because you'll see why in a minute. It's helpful for us to see different sides of the individual to be able to know some of the key features. So now, again, big bodied, small bodied, the northern redback salamander lead phase on the right, the traditional phase is the redback, which is the one on the left. So this is basically 2 color morphs of the same species. The northern redback salamander on the left has that very distinguished or distinct red stripe, kind of a brick red stripe along its back. And it's, similar to the leadback phase, it's about 4 inches long. Now, these two are not easily confused, right? They're just, but you only have to tell us the species you're seeing anyway. You don't have to tell us the color. However, the northern redback salamander in its traditional redback phase can easily be confused with the four-toed salamander, because now we're talking about 2 species that are similar in length. They're similar in their petite size. And so there's a couple key things to point out to you. One is the red coloration on the redback salamander generally is that distinct stripe. Now, does nature always follow the field guide that you're looking at? No, of course, there's always variability. But, so you want to look at multiple features. On the four-toed salamander, which is, well, I'll talk about it later. It's a great little salamander. It has a constriction at the base of its tail that isn't always really easy to spot, but it can be, and it's right at the base of the tail. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the reason it's there is because it can very easily drop off its tail when it's being chased by a predator and it wants to leave a decoy that's left wiggling for the predator to pursue while the four-toed salamander gets away. But that constriction is identifying. The 4 toes on the rear feet are identifying. However, if you can tell from this photo, you can see the pebbles embedded in the road, and you know how small those pebbles are. So the toes are even tinier. So I wouldn't suggest counting toes as a easy diagnostic when you're in the middle of a migration. But one thing that's really unique about the four-toed salamander is the belly, which you can see in the image in the lower right. It's a white belly with black flecks. Now, picking up a four-toed salamander to look at its belly is like trying to pick up an earthworm in a rainstorm. They can be that small. So one way that can help volunteers identify the belly so they know the difference between this and the redback salamander, which has more of like a, almost like if you imagine like salt and pepper all mixed up, or like beach sand, it's like that kind of fine speckling as opposed to these dark black flecks on a white belly. Is if you brought like a clear document sleeve or a piece of plastic from like an overhead projection sheet or something like that, you could slide it under and then you could carefully lift it up and look at the belly, and that can help you identify. And if you want to take a photo of that, even better, because then we know for sure you've seen a four-toed, which is very helpful for us because four-toed salamanders, because they're confused so much, knowing that you actually saw one would be very helpful to us. So those are those two reddish species. Here are all the species I just talked about, just three. The bigger, robust Jefferson blue spotted salamander complex, the petite northern redback salamander in the red phase, the traditional red phase, and also the lead morph, leadback, and then the four-toed salamander. So hopefully that helps. And I'm going to just also share the one true vernal pool breeding frog that we have, which is wood frog. And if you're seeing wood frogs, we want to know you saw wood frogs. And so if you're going to make sure you know the key species, this is an important one to make sure you know. And if you become familiar with them, you'll recognize they're so distinct. How could you confuse them with anything else? But in the beginning, it might be easy to confuse them with some of the other species. So a few key features. And this montage, these are all wood frogs. And you can see, again, there can be some variability in color. But they all, the wood frog has the raccoon mask, which is like the Zorro mask, almost, of this dark patch beneath the eye and above the lip. And you can tell from these photos, it's not always as distinct as it is in some individuals. So that's, again, why you want to look at a whole suite of features. The other feature on a wood frog that is distinct is this dorsolateral ridges. There's two ridges going along its back. You can see those easily in each of these photos. And then the other identifying characteristic is the white upper lip. And you can also see that in each of these images. You can even notice it when you're above the wood frog, like in the upper right photo. You can see the white showing up from its upper lip. And as one volunteer called it, I think, a milk mustache. But that is something that is unique and really stands out in the wood frogs, which generally are kind of a reddish, brownish, pinkish brownish to darker brown, can be kind of variable in color. Males and females are even a little bit different. But those are the three images, or the three identifiers, that are helpful for you to know. Doesn't matter if it's male, doesn't matter if it's female, just want to get the species right. So species that volunteers have confused wood frogs with frequently include the gray tree frog and the spring peeper, which are our two tree frog species here in the Hudson Valley. So just to show them side by side, these photos are not to scale to size. So they actually are different in size. So you'll see, whereas the wood frog might go from 1.5 inches to 3 inches, these two tree frogs are only going to reach about 1.5 inches in size. So big difference in size. Also, the spring peeper, which is, the one we see lots and lots of, they're the ones that have the beautiful chorus that sounds like sleigh bells in the late winter, early spring. Very common. They have this X on its back, a cross on its back that you can observe in some, not all. They also have toe pads, and that is a really important identifying feature, both in the spring peeper and the gray tree frog, because again, they are tree frogs, and toe pads are a feature of tree frogs. If you look at their toes in these photos, you can see those little discs that are at the end of their toes. That is a great distinguishing characteristic, because a wood frog has these very long toes without discs. So that's another thing to look for. Gray tree frog, the photo on the right, they're not that often seen. They will be out sometimes on these rainy nights. They have this yellowish coloration in their inner thighs and their groin area. You can get a glimpse of that in this photo. And they have blotches on their back, but they don't make that perfect X shape that often appears on the spring peeper. So hopefully that helps you with these. distinctions. And what I would encourage you to do is, before I move on to this next question section, is use this time between now and the migration to brush up your identification skills. Look at lots of reliable photos. Don't rely on the internet image search, because there's a lot of misidentified amphibians on the internet. So look for, a .org type website, or .edu type website where there are, reliable either academic, state agency type sources for good photos. iNaturalist is another good source, but also check out field guides like some of the ones we recommended. Okay, moving on to some commonly asked questions. See how I'm doing on time, we're good. Okay, where do I go to survey? A lot of people ask that, and there's a couple thoughts on this. One is that I put this in the Q&A. Module 4 of our YouTube training modules does go over how to find possible locations, because again, we don't know them all, right? The database is growing, but of all the surveys we've received, not all of them have gone to the same location repeatedly, right, over the different years. So we might have a one shot here or there. And so we don't have a full map of like all of the reliable known locations that where high mortality is a problem. So you could always do what we call like a windshield survey. And this is all described in module 4, which I'll recommend you take a look at. You also can join up with a group of other volunteers in your area. And I'm so thrilled and grateful that we have a growing group of project partners that are helping organize volunteers locally. And these span from Westchester County all the way to Albany and Rensselaer counties, and everything from different nonprofit groups, land trusts, watershed community conservation advisory councils, the Climate Smart Committee, and some academic partners. And I want to give a shout out because I believe there are some folks watching this virtual training together tonight at Vassar College and also at Columbia Green Cornell Cooperative Extension. So thanks so much for hosting these watch parties of tonight's training. But in an upcoming bulletin, which will, unless you told us not to, we're going to subscribe all of you to get our bulletin, which only really gets sent out this time of year with alerts about the migration, opportunities for training, things like that. I'm going to list contact information for all of these partners so that you can see if there's anybody working in your area, and you can hopefully connect with them directly and join up with a group of volunteers in your area. And then if that doesn't work out for you, you can certainly email us at the Woodland Pool email address, which I think you should all have by now, and we can try to help you find a location. But again, we're also hoping you can help us know about locations that we don't know about already. Other questions: how many volunteers should survey at a single location and for how long? So hopefully you all know the answer. So the first question is not 1 volunteer. 2 volunteers is good. 3 volunteers even better, because as Penny mentioned, you want to keep an eye on the road and keep yourself safe. You want to keep an eye on the amphibians and keep them safe. And I will just circle back to Penny mentioned keep your feet on the street. Part of that saying is to remind you that if you park and you're staying on the side of the margin of the road where it's grassy, often there can be a number of amphibians kind of there before they start crossing the road, and they're very difficult to see. And so that's why if you can keep your feet on the street, if it's safe, you have a better chance of seeing what might be underfoot and not accidentally stepping on them. But again, so, you want to volunteer to keep an eye on traffic. You want to volunteer to keep an eye on the road. And the amphibians on the road. It's good to have somebody collecting the data on the data form, and it's good to have somebody who, or more than one person maybe moving the amphibians. So, so I would say 3 or 4 would be great. And then for how long should you go? So a wonderful PhD biologist at Cornell, Elise Edwards, helped us do some analysis of some of our data a few years ago. And she looked at kind of, when is volunteer effort optimized on a single survey? And, at what point does like the effort no longer produce any more results and it's kind of becomes inefficient? And she found that it was about 5 to 6 hours per survey. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go out at 10 o'clock and, come back at, do the math, 4 a.m. It means volunteer hours. So like if Penny, Emma, and I all go to a crossing and we spend 2 hours there, that's 6 hours, right? So 5 to 6 hours at a survey is great, volunteer hours. However, we are grateful for you to go out for as long or as little as you would like and you're able to. So, so that's that. I know we get questions about if you live outside the Hudson River Estuary watershed. Of course, we work for the Hudson River Estuary program. We can barely keep up with the participation in this project as it is. So we, so we can't, our program isn't equipped to expand statewide or even beyond. However, there are a growing number of groups that are taking this on in other parts of the state. For example, in Tompkins County, there's the Tompkins County Amphibian Monitoring Patrol, or TCAMP. I believe they have a Facebook page. But what I will say is you are welcome, if you live outside of the Hudson Valley, to use the Survey 123 form that Emma reviewed to share your observations. And what I will do is make sure that our DEC colleagues at other regional offices in New York State get those. And I will share in a little bit how we've already shared data with DEC from the volunteer efforts. So, so that is, I guess, the answer to that question. And then, is it okay to handle amphibians, and what about gloves? So the general feeling amongst practitioners of crossing projects like ours, and we're not unique, there's programs like this throughout New England, down in New Jersey. And actually, I learned a lot from the New England programs when I created this project in 2009. And the general feeling is that the mortality on roads from cars is greater than the mortality or not even mortality, but any impact we would have in handling amphibians. But that said, when you handle amphibians, you want to hold the amphibian carefully with 2 hands. You don't want to pick them up by a leg. You don't want to pick them up by a tail on the salamanders. These are little vertebrate animals. You don't want to be breaking limbs. If you're not comfortable handling amphibians, that would be a great job to give to one of your partners out on the road, and you could be maybe the data collector, for example. You do want to, again, as we've talked about, make sure your hands are free of anything that could contaminate the skin of these very sensitive animals. And the concern sometimes about handling amphibians is transfer of disease. And the general feeling is if they are all going to the same vernal pool to breed and they're all part of that same little localized population, there's probably already transfer of the disease. However, if you're crossing salamanders on your road and then you decide to drive 3 miles to another crossing and help there, it would be good for you to wash your hands between those 2 different locations so that you're not transferring anything from one local population to another. So you could stop at a gas station, maybe wash your hands, or as soon as you get in your car, use some hand sanitizer so you have some time for it to kind of, dry up and wear off by the time you get to the next location. And then when you get outside, just get your hands wet in the rain, give them a rub, and hopefully you should be good to go. I will also mention, amphibians are protected in New York State from harassment, from collection. The temporary intervening of you picking it up and moving it is acceptable, but you don't want to handle them for longer than necessary because, as I mentioned in the beginning, they're ectothermic. They're very responsive to the heat they might be getting exposed to from your hands, from the flashlight. You don't want to add to any drying out of their skin. So when you're taking photos, which we appreciate taking photos for identification purposes, and you can keep them on the road, take a picture of them on the road, if it's safe for you. But if you're taking photos for social media and you're trying to get the perfect photo, and this means you're prolonging how long they're in your hand, how long they're under a light, that is not good for the amphibian. So try to maybe minimize, get a photo of it on the road while it's doing its thing and it's wet, it's in the rain, and it doesn't always have to be in somebody's hand when you take a photo. If you can get a great shot of it on the road as it's moving or after it's off the road safely in the grass, that's great. and I would say though, one of the reasons I actually started my Instagram account because of this project. I'm not a big social media fan, but I started it because I wanted to figure out a way to connect all of you that are out volunteering across this massive region and never having a chance to connect with each other. And so the idea was, if we use this hashtag amphibian migration HV for Hudson Valley, and you post photos of what's happening, say, where you're located with, maybe a little snippet of not specific location information, but you might say, I'm in the town of Pound Ridge in Westchester County. It's 42 degrees and raining, and I'm seeing amphibians, and you post some photos and you do hashtag amphibian migration HV. Then maybe I get on Instagram and I look for that hashtag and I can see, oh, look, their amphibians are out in Westchester County. We should maybe go out and look here in Ulster County. So it's a nice way to virtually connect everybody. So if you're, and also it's fun if you use Instagram, and I think hashtags work on Facebook also. If you do a search for those hashtags, you can find all these amazing photos that volunteers have posted over the years. So that's the reason for that. But just that with a word of caution to remember why we're here, and it's really to help the amphibians. And so, try to minimize handling to whatever is needed to keep them safe, and then we'll be in good shape. Okay, so I did want to also take some time to talk about what we're calling data stories. And this is just to reiterate the incredible value of well-collected, accurate data and the applications we might be able to use the data for. So I want to first, revisit in the beginning of tonight's training, I talked about what our project goals were. So I just wanted to take a moment to look at how are we doing on these goals. I will point out, in terms of raising awareness, that has been really successful in that there's always news articles, and there's been interest even from some major media. The project has been in New York Times and Smithsonian Magazine, but I think it's really important. A lot of our local papers pick it up. Lots of different organizations post about it on social media. And so all of these, even for people who read our newsletter, they don't all go out and volunteer, but there's ways to educate about this amazing group of amphibians, the habitats that they need, and hopefully that will lead to better conservation. So I think from that perspective of raising awareness, this project has been really effective. Hopefully lots of volunteers are having rewarding experiences. We do get a lot of great, wonderful feedback. We love reading the comments that you include in your data forms about how valuable it is for you to be out there, knowing you're making an impact. And we are certainly locating road crossings, and mortality of crossing amphibians has been reduced by volunteers. And I'll talk a little bit about this idea of how we're also identifying conservation opportunities. That's where I'm going to focus on most of this talk. But just in terms of the data that are being collected, this is, these are data from 2009 to 2025. And with the caveat that 2024 and 2025 data, we're still finalizing the quality control on those. We had some staffing shifts and staffing capacity issues, but we're hoping we're on solid ground now. We're going to be able to finish that this year, this month, the next month. But these numbers are really impressive, and the volunteers who've collected them are so impressive. The spring peeper is the most common species we see, obviously, with that number of 32,000, but then followed by a number of our vernal pool species. So in the project so far, we've had more than 1,000 volunteers. Some volunteers come back year after year. Some have only come out once. That's fine. But I don't want you to think 1,000 volunteers participate every year. On average, we have about 300 people come out from year to year in the last years, which is amazing. Amazing. There's been more than 2,000 surveys collected, about 1920 species observed. More than 50,000 amphibians have been assisted across roads, and volunteers have counted 83,000 at least individual amphibians, frogs and salamanders and toads. The sad story there is that more than 25,000 have been killed by roads. On the road by cars, and that represents about 30% mortality. And so that is why the work you're all doing to ensure their safe crossing is so valuable. One other story about these data is that when we think about the timing As you all know, if you get the migration alerts, it's tricky to predict the migration, and it can be variable in terms of when it happens. And there's this kind of general rule of thumb, right? It's raining, it's more than 40 degrees after sunset, and the ground is thawed. And the data show on this bar chart, you can see wood frog, spotted salamander. Those are two of our key, most common vernal pool breeders. And volunteers are seeing those the most out of all these other amphibians that breed in other times of the year, right? So some of them are more warmer season breeders. They breed more in the summer, but they all are out because, again, they need wet skin. They're all out taking advantage of these wet nights. Another species that we're, including in these kind of focal species is the four-toed salamander. Four-toed salamander doesn't necessarily have to breed in a vernal pool. It can breed in other kinds of wetland habitats. The key is that they need sphagnum moss. They actually lay their eggs in the moss. The eggs drop into the pool below, or the hatchlings, drop into the pool below, or the water below. Excuse me. Sorry, this is late for me. They drop into the water below, and the four-toed salamander, they actually breed in the fall, but the females migrate to go lay these eggs in the spring. So they overlap with the migration of the key vernal pool breeders. And because they're a species of greatest conservation need, high priority in New York State, the fact that we can use migration as an opportunity for volunteers to document where they're present is huge. So that is why, we're also happy that four-toed salamander is also very high up on the list in terms of what's being seen. And then the little puzzle here is the Jefferson blue spotted salamander complex. Now, they are not as common in New York State as the spotted salamander, but it's not clear whether the lower numbers that we're seeing, the 1,240 in all these years, is because they are not as common, and their distribution isn't is as abundant as the spotted salamander, or is it because we're not getting out early enough? Because they are earliest to breed. They've been seen digging through snow. They've been seen, they'll slip into the vernal pool even when there's just a little bit of ice that's thawed, and they can just slip under the ice. They really are cold tolerant, like wood frog and spotted salamander, but they seem to breed or move earlier. So it's possible we need to maybe be adventurous and go out maybe even on nights when it feels like maybe it's too early and maybe it's too cold, and maybe that will help us make sure we are capturing the very beginning of the migration, just like we want to capture kind of the end. And the end of the migration is usually signaled by, well, first of all, we can go to a vernal pool, we can see that there's egg masses, we can see that there's activity in the pool, the amphibians have come and they've gone back, the adults rather. But when that is one sign, but from a road crossing perspective, when we start seeing these warmer breeder species like bullfrogs and green frogs and fewer of these kind of cold tolerant species, that's when we also know, okay, it's safe to stop. We're done here. So that is like kind of the array of amphibian species and individual numbers volunteers have been recording. One other great opportunity by being out on the roads is getting to see emerging issues. And one of them, very sadly, is salt bloat that has been observed in wood frogs. And salt bloat is the result of these very excessive salt applications that are on our roads in the Northeast. And research out of Connecticut found that a number of amphibians were showing this bloat. So I'm going to point out that's the photo in the center, as opposed to a gravid female, gravid meaning having eggs. The photo on the left is more typical of kind of the midsection being expanded and full of eggs. And sometimes you can even almost see through the skin. You can see that there's something that looks like eggs in there. That is very different from this kind of distribution of bloat in the center photo. And it's very sad. It's, there's concern that the salt bloat will affect their mobility, their ability to, move as they're coming out of migration, or out of overwintering and moving during the migration. So what we would ask is, if you see this, take photos and make a note in their comments, and we'll take a look. And I'm in touch with a researcher in Connecticut and want to find out ways we can support his work by what we can observe in the Hudson Valley through all these volunteer eyes being on the road throughout the region. And then, of course, on the right is a normal sized wood frog without eggs, it's probably a male, and without salt bloat. So then the other question for us with, here's like a small screenshot of part of our massive Excel spreadsheet that has all the data from you. Will the data reveal any trends about, migration conditions, timing of migration? It would be, the more years we do this, the more we'll be able to see those kinds of shifts. We also, hopefully, as has been already mentioned tonight, think about, are there any ways that data can point us toward needs for mitigating the mortality? So things like temporary road closures, which our friends up in New Hampshire have helped us understand that their success in closing roads in Keene, New Hampshire was no easy feat, right? There was like about 10 years of continuous data collection, every migration on that road closure. And to close a road temporarily is a lot of logistics. So it's not the easiest thing to do. And so you really want to make sure that you have enough data to justify that. So someday, hopefully, these data will enable, for example, a municipality who wants to take that action to do that. But also getting back to what I told you in the beginning is that our team really focuses on conservation planning. How can we provide science-based data, tools, and so forth to help communities and land trusts set priorities for biodiversity conservation, and then hopefully protect the important habitat? That was one of the burning questions I've had about how can the location data you're providing us help inform that. And so one of the ways we're pursuing this is a collaborative project with the New York Natural Heritage Program, which is the state organization. It's part of DEC through a collaboration with SUNY ESF. And you might be familiar with the Heritage Program because they are the state program that maintains the database of rare species and ecological communities in New York. I think every state has a heritage program. They also do a lot of other amazing work. And so one of the projects that we're collaborating on with them is developing important areas for vernal pool amphibians. And the idea here was, while the road location doesn't tell us where there's a vernal pool, we know how far these amphibians travel. We know they need upland forest and vernal pools. And so the important areas model is a tool that the Heritage Program has been using for years on other known locations of rare species. And those known locations are usually derived from a professional biologist making an observation in the field, and it gets verified, and the Heritage Program can then use this model to develop what would be the conservation zone that would be needed for that known location at that particular geographic site. So the question was, can we do this with road crossing data? Because that would be a really helpful and novel way to use amphibian volunteer data about amphibians. We don't have any volunteer amphibians yet, but who knows, someday. So this is kind of a little schematic to help you understand how this works. These models are species specific, location specific algorithms. So they, again, take into account, what do we know about the species? What do we know about the geography of that site? What does the landscape look like? And what do we know about how the species interacts with the natural surroundings? And so the resulting important areas are going to be these location specific kind of delineated zones that will help us think about, if we were to be proactive about trying to conserve the important forests and wetland habitats, what would that look like? And so we're going to be working on this. And one of the reasons I want to make sure you're aware of this project is because we started with, I think about 1,600 surveys that we needed to go through and make sure we felt really confident in those data before we gave them over to the Heritage Program to run this model, right? So we did a lot of scrutinizing. We had to throw out almost 300 surveys because the information about the location was unclear or the distance was so long that we could not pinpoint. And that's fine. If you're doing a windshield survey and you're going to drive for 2 miles trying to find where there's a crossing and you report that to us to let us know, I drove 2 miles, I didn't see anything. We still want you to tell us that. That's fine. But it's when you put the pinpoint in, as Emma showed, like on a house, and we're like, did they mean to put the pinpoint on the house? And then Penny emails you to say, hey, volunteer, did you mean to put the pinpoint on the house? Because we don't think you did. Where is the actual crossing? If you never get back to us, we can't use your survey. So we really want to emphasize the importance of getting the location as accurate as you can. So take your time with the mapper. And if you have problems, just to repeat Emma's encouragement, feel free to reach out to us. And I would also say, if we email you with a question, and this is why we need your email address and your phone number to be correct in your data form, please do respond to the question so that we can remedy the question in the database and we can use your data for these kinds of projects. So this year, I'm really excited. We're going to be revisiting this project. We're going to rerun the data with the last 2 years of data. We're going to massage the methodology, and hopefully we're going to have something that we can share in the next, say, 12 months. One other exciting way your volunteer data were applied, in this case to wildlife assessment, the DEC just released the draft of the updated New York State Wildlife Action Plan. This gets updated periodically. And as part of that initiative, there were updates to the species status assessments. And I was so grateful that our DEC colleague up in Albany reached out to us and asked for the amphibian migration and road crossing data. And one example of how this was used is with the four-toed salamander assessment. Again, I mentioned this is a high priority species of greatest conservation need in New York. And it was described as being challenging to find in the assessment, in part because there's not a statewide survey for this species. And as a result, the estimates of abundance and population trends remain unknown. There is, but what's exciting is when they took the map of New York State that was broken up into these atlas squares, kind of like a census, atlas or a census square. Each of these squares, there's 979 of these survey quads or squares across New York State. In the HERP atlas, that was the reptile and amphibian atlas that was done through volunteer observations back in the 80s and 90s, 76 of the squares across New York State were shown to have four-toed salamander. And when they updated this assessment, they were able to take amphibian migration and road crossing volunteer data, and that helped add 18 new squares to this map that shows the distribution of this species in New York State, and the same was done for some other species. So just yay, and thank you again, AM&RC volunteers, because you're helping inform also what DEC knows about amphibian distribution across New York State. And so as a result, between those data surveys from our project, some other known locations from iNaturalist and other sources, the four-toed salamander now is documented in 104 of those 979 survey quads that are mapped across New York State. So again, just another reason why, and I will also, couch all of this to say, if you get out for the migration to observe our incredible wildlife, or maybe to help them move across the road and to share the information, let people know how important, these amphibians and their habitats are, that is great. I know not everybody might feel comfortable sharing data, but I just want you to see there's value in sharing your data. So if you can do that, take that extra step. We really appreciate it, and we will do our best to make sure there's use for the data you're collecting. And why is this great? Because we have these amazing amphibians that are going to benefit from all of this effort. And as I like to think, we're one big team working across the Hudson Valley and even beyond in trying to protect biodiversity together, because it's something that's going to take everybody at all scales, at all levels, contributing how they can. So thank you. So some of the take-home messages for this evening, and for this, the impact of the project volunteers. If the data are collected well, again, you can help us learn about where and when migration is happening. You can help us raise awareness about the importance of maintaining connected habitats and the importance of avoiding fragmentation. And, if you're interested in ways to learn how to do this, again, look at our conservation planning website. There's a lot of examples and ideas about local planning. I often say if you're trying to save habitat connectivity when a big subdivision has already been proposed, that's almost too late. It's good to be as proactive as we can, and that can be accommodated through planning and policy and land trust work and so forth. Good stewardship by private landowners. Volunteers can have an immediate positive impact, which is, how many times does that happen? Not that many. So when you move an amphibian across the road, you have a positive impact immediately. And that certainly happened with more than 50,000 amphibians moved safely. But then again, that's the short-term impact. You can also have long-term impacts by helping inform where mitigation might be needed, adopting a road, for example, or, having volunteers out on a road every year, or eventually moving toward even more costly, more intensive types of mitigation measures if warranted, like road closures or even under road passages, which again, there's only a handful of examples of those too, because they really are expensive and they really need a lot of data to show this is really worth the multi-million-dollar underpass for salamanders because road mortality is so high. So we want to make sure, again, we have good data. And hopefully, again, too, these data will inform local conservation planning to protect vernal pool species, habitats, including forests. Yes, the four-toed salamander is happy about that, as are we. I'm going to suggest, I don't know, well, let me debrief, and Penny and Emma, I can't see you, but if you want to join me and turn your cameras on at any point and chime in if I'm missing anything, but do want to point out that all of the resources that we've been chatting about and listing in the chat, they are all on our webpage and, on the DEC website. And we're going to post this recording of this. So if you, got on late, had to leave early, you're not here anymore if you did leave early, but the recording will be available. You can watch it on any, and you can also watch our modules on YouTube. You're automatically, when you log off, you're automatically going to be directed to a program evaluation. And we really do appreciate your feedback. We take into consideration what we learn from participants in both our in-person and virtual training. So if you have a few minutes to fill that out, maybe we'll end early to make sure you have time for that. And in the next week, probably like next week, we'll be sending out an email after we finish the final in-person training with follow-up information to everybody who's come to any kind of our trainings this year with lots of resources. And what to do between now and the migration. Now is the best time to get prepared. Make sure you have a headlamp and a flashlight that works. Make sure you have extra batteries. Make sure you have a reflective vest. Make sure you have printed out any data forms you need. Things like that. Ask us any questions. Just get everything ready to go. And, that way, given the spontaneous nature of this volunteer work, because we have to kind of wait for the weather to be right, it's helpful if you prepare now so that the minute we start hearing migration looks like it's promising, you're ready to go. And by the way, yeah, that's what the pop-up will look like when you log off. It's going to say you're going to an external site, and that is just the site that will link you to the evaluation. Before I move to the next moment of reflection, Emma and Penny, I'm looking over here because I see you on this screen. Did I miss anything on the debrief? No? All right. So, always like to end our training with a favorite poem. And if you get the e-news from our program, you know that we like to sprinkle in some poetry and prose and some quotes. So this is a favorite called Birdfoot's Grandpa by Joseph Bruchac. And I can barely read I'm going to look over here. No, I can see it. The old man must have stopped our car 24 times to climb out and gather into his hands the small toads, blinded by our lights and leaping, live drops of rain. The rain was falling, a mist about his white hair, and I kept saying, you can't save them all. Accept it. Get back in. We've got places to go. But leathery hands full of wet brown life, knee-deep in summer roadside grass, he just smiled and said, they have places to go too. So we love that. There's our little American toad in the summer, because you can tell there's greenery. And so I always have to remind everybody, you won't be out in the summer in the roadside grass. You're going to be out in the late winter, early spring in the cold, but with hopefully hands full of life that you're moving across the road. And in the spirit of having places to go, we also know that we're winding down here. So we can take the next, say, 10 minutes to continue answering some questions that we've had in the Q&A that maybe we haven't had a chance to answer yet. And then we'll give you some time to maybe get, log off and fill out the evaluation. So I'm going to stop sharing if that's cool. And Emma and Penny, are there questions and first of all, thank everybody for, if you're still with us, for hanging through all of this. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to try to look at the Q&A here, but let me know if you've seen. Oh yeah.
Yeah, there are a few questions in there that we thought you would be best to answer.
Sure.
Yeah, there's some questions about the lights. We also had a
Right.
couple of questions about this in the
Okay.
training.
Just give me a minute to get oriented to the long list
Yeah.
here. Are there okay.
Yeah, thank you everyone. By the
Yeah.
way, if you're jumping off, yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. And thank you for still being here. Okay, well, so will lights scare off or negatively impact the amphibians? From what I understand, no. And I didn't show it you in this slide presentation, but you did see the picture of the wood frog with the worm in its mouth. There's some other great pictures of wood frogs already entering amplexus while they're on the road. There's a picture that a volunteer grabbed of a wood frog in amplexus, which is basically when the male grabs onto the female from behind to like be ready for external fertilization. There is a picture of a male wood frog grabbing on the back of a spotted salamander walking across the road. So when I say to you, they are coming out of winter hibernation with like one thought on their mind, the lights don't seem to phase this very singular focus that they have of getting to the pools as early as they can. And I know this is a little bit of a departure from the lights question, but I often use the analogy of speed dating, right? If you were to go to a speed dating night, you wouldn't want to show up to speed dating, 4 weeks after everybody else showed up to speed dating. The same is true for these amphibians. They just want to get to the pools when all the other individuals are there. That will ensure their success, right? Hopefully in courtship and mating and egg laying and so forth. So, so just to keep that in mind, I think the lights will prevent you from stepping on them, which is very easy to do. When you're out if you have not been out in the dark, in the rain, looking for amphibians, they're very hard to see. So again, if it's like making them a little nervous from the light versus having them be either stepped on or run over by a car, because I think the lights are minimal. But what I would say, and I wrote this in the Q&A, I think there's a tendency sometimes to like want to hold a light up close to an amphibian in the hand to get a great picture, but the heat from the light could be bad, so I would avoid exposing them to the heat. Are there any efforts to monitor the return trip after egg laying? Excellent question, Diane from Pine Plains, if I remember correctly. And Diane, I saw you emailed earlier. I'm glad you made it into the webinar. So there was research out of Monmouth, New Jersey. I forget if it's Monmouth College or University, actually looking at the vulnerability of the juveniles leaving the pools, right, after they've developed. And they are quite vulnerable during that time, and volunteer intervention could be really great. However, the capacity of this project, we're not able to do that. What I would say is, if you know of a good crossing by you and you want to be ambitious and go out in rainy nights, maybe in July or August, you could look for them. We probably don't have the capacity to be taking in more data once we move on from the project, which is very intensive for us for a few months. But I think that's, something you could do as a naturalist. I think it'd be interesting as somebody maybe informing local conservation efforts. It would be interesting. And certainly you could email us and let us know what you've seen, and that, that's of interest to us as well. Oh, I just saw a question pop up. Is there a projected date or window for the migration? Oh, the crystal ball. If I only knew that, I would probably play the lottery every day because of my chances. No, it's better chances than playing the lottery. I would say that I don't know at this point. You know, if you look at the long range forecast, as you all know, it could be predicting a snowstorm and then it ends up being, you know, it goes out to sea and then suddenly we have warm weather. So basically, we're not expecting there to be migration until we start seeing evening temperatures starting to warm up, right? If we're still sitting in 15, 16, 22 degree nights Fahrenheit, probably not going to happen anytime soon. We need to see ice start to melt off the vernal pools. We need to see a little bit of the snowpack go away. And again, it'll be when it's, you know, getting above 40 degrees at night after sunset. So the window is when the window happens. It's happened as early as mid-February. It's happened as late as early April. So that's the window, I would say. Any other questions that are screaming out to you or Emma or Penny that you feel like I actually would have an answer to? Is the salt bloat from them ingesting the salt or is it touching its skin? You know what? I have actually a research paper right here about salt bloat, which I've not read yet. And I don't actually know, but my guess is they are so connected to their surroundings because of their skin that my guess is exposure and ingestion almost become one and the same. You know, I should have prefaced tonight's talk with saying I'm not a herpetologist. I'm a, you know, a biologist who's been very involved in conservation planning. And that's how this question, I mean, that's how this project integrates into really our conservation planning work and not so much like a herp research type project. But if we can get an answer to that question and end up turning that out as when we do the follow-up, we will. Would holding a cane between amphibian pickups be all right? I would say, you know, maybe do a little wipe of your cane handle, just the way you would your hands. And I would think that would be fine. And thank you for trying to navigate using a cane on a wet road. Please be safe. Interesting question. Is there a way to tell the difference between amphibians being on the road and a migration crossing? Right. So this is an interesting question. It is like I've gone in places that, you know, because I also like to on my own look to see if I can find a new crossing. And I've seen like one spotted salamander crossing the road in a location. Is that like a high concentration migration area that maybe has a high mortality? Probably not. But it might mean that there's some habitat in the area and that amphibian is moving, you know. So I guess it depends what you're defining as migration crossing, but any of these data are useful because again, if we think about the science side and potentially sharing these data with people involved in more research, knowing that say me, Emma, and Penny all go out with our separate groups, 3 locations. Penny is at a location, sees 500 amphibians moving. Emma sees 50 and I see none. But we're all say in the same county, we're all in the same latitude, the conditions are all the same. That is going to tell us something about where suitable habitat is or isn't. So that's why knowing where you're going and not seeing is as important as going, you know, knowing where you are going and seeing. So I hope that answers the question. You know, it could be 1 migrating or 2 migrating amphibians. If you see just like, you know, 3 green frogs, that's not the vernal pool species that we're concerned about. That said, the other benefit to you being out and documenting even non-vernal vernal pool species is that one of the goals of the New York State Wildlife Action Plan is to keep common species common. So having records of where even common species are is not a waste of effort. So I hopefully that answers the question. And is there a good way to connect with other volunteers near us? I did cover that in the talk. Okay, great. It's been answered verbally. Yes, great. That was earlier. Yes, Sophia, keep common species common. That should be our mantra. I always say when people say, oh, it's just a bullfrog, I'm like, it's just a bullfrog till bullfrogs become uncommon for some reason. So enjoy the ones that are common now while we can and keep learning about them. Yes, James, would you be able to use past volunteer data to guide future volunteers to certain areas, for example, under-observed areas. We do hope to use the data for that kind of application. We have some preliminary analysis that could potentially help us with that. Again, I would say if you really have no clue where to go by you, send an email to the Woodland Pool Box. We'll try our best to either connect you to somebody that might have a known location or give you an idea of where you might go. When will this recording be available? Penny answered that. Let's just say as soon as we can. We've got a busy couple of weeks ahead, and we're going to try to get it processed and have the transcript all ready. We need to do that too for accessibility. We want to make sure it's accessible to everybody. And if you haven't caught wind of this, all the webinars that have been posted by DEC in the past have become unavailable. So there's a big effort right now to move them all over to YouTube. So it's a little bit complicated right now. Oh, Josh Fisher, hello from up north. Has this project led to the installation of any road crossing infrastructure in a particularly high activity crossing? This project has not. When any day a underroad salamander tunnel gets installed, you are going to hear about that. It's going to make news, and we're going to be shouting it out. The few places it's happened, the first tunnels that were ever installed, which I think, God, it dates back maybe to the 70s, was Henry Street in Amherst, Massachusetts. And a lot has been learned about those. Those were very small openings. But those were the first I think they might have been the first in the Northeast, if not the US. More recently, in Moncton, Vermont, the Moncton Conservation Commission had been collecting road data for years at this one site. One of the CEC members, Chris Slazar, also worked for Vermont Transportation Authority, VTrans, and through that connection was able to be one of the driving forces to get a whole lot of funding needed to put in the Moncton, Vermont underpass, which is much bigger than what they did in Massachusetts. It is a square culvert with a natural bottom. It's very large. I believe there's perforations on the road to allow for light and rain to get through, and it's been very successful. We featured Chris Slazar on a webinar, which we're trying to recover the recording of to get it on YouTube, and he explains it was not easy to get that project to happen. So again, because these price tags are like in the $1 million, 7-digit kind of range, we definitely need to get really good data repeated over many years to be able to show how to get that kind of crossing installed. And right now, New Jersey is working on at least one underpassage for, I believe, amphibians, maybe amphibians and reptiles. But one other consideration that is really exciting to think about as an opportunity is you don't want to go through the expense of an underroad tunnel if the land isn't protected on either side, right? Can you imagine spending $1.5 million, say, for a salamander tunnel, and then a subdivision goes in the forest that's on one side of the tunnel? So I think that's a great opportunity for state agencies, land trusts, and others to think about land conservation where we know there's crossings, because again, and that will hopefully, the important areas will hopefully inform where there might be places that the actual habitat conservation is important. And then that might also justify why the siting of a particular underpass might make sense. All right, it's 3 minutes of. I would love to make sure people have a chance to fill out the evaluation. So Emma and Penny, both looking very pensive. Is there anything you think that needs to be addressed before we start to wind down here? I'm trying to see if I can, or I don't even know how many people are still on. Oh, let's see here. Oh, we still have almost 50 people on. That's great. Thank you everybody so much for joining us for tonight and being here. Are there any other?
One individual asked about getting some amphibian crossing signs.
Okay, send us an email. We have a limited number of those, but we'd certainly be able to loan some of those out. So thank you for that. Yeah, I will say, you know, we got these campaign style signs that have the metal stakes, and some roadsides, they're like really hard to even get in the road, depending on what the material is underneath the kind of shoulder area. But certainly they can be helpful. And I will say that in some communities that have been organizing volunteers, like Rhinebeck, there's a really wonderful set of partners in Northern Dutchess County, the Rhinebeck Climate Smart Group, Bard College, the Sawkill Watershed Community, the CAC in Red Hook and Rhinebeck. They've all been helping organize volunteers for years, and their police now have become so engaged. They come, and I think they put up a big LED sign during migration season to warn about volunteers on the road, which is so great. And so we didn't talk about that tonight, but we do send out an alert to county law enforcement to make them aware of this project and volunteers out on the road. But if you're working locally and you know of a crossing that you're going to be monitoring, you know, you can certainly give your local police a heads up as well. That can help with safety. Along with the reflective vest, so important, headlamp, you can put on like a blinking light that bikers use on your back, whatever. Any way to keep yourself visible, as Penny mentioned earlier, it's really important. All right, 1 minute down. Should we call it a night?
I don't see any more questions.
Amazing.
Here.
Wow. Well, I want to thank Penny and Emma also for your great presentations and for co-facilitating. And thank you to everybody who joined us.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
all for coming,
you.
and thank you, Laura, as well.
Oh
Yes.
yeah. And good luck to everybody. You know, hope you participate. And again, you know, be safe. And we look forward to hearing like the reports from the road.
Yes, thank you,
Thanks, everybody,
everyone.
for sending in messages.
And don't forget to fill out the survey that'll pop up when you exit.
Yes. And Penny, don't forget at some point to stop the recording.
You got it.
Thank you. And I don't know if you and Emma want to stay on for a minute.